Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Delighted to have Dr. Angela Cortellessa back talking about the future of work. Take it away, Angela.
All right, thanks, Shrikant. Hi, everybody. Good to see some returning familiar faces and some new people here as well. Today, as Shrikant said, we're going to be talking about the future of work and as it pertains in particular to polymathic people. So these are people who are not narrow specialists. And just a rough overview of how we're going to spend our time. So for about 45 minutes to an hour, Leslie, Dr. Overmeyer-Day, and I will be chatting. And if anyone wants to jump in and make any comments or questions while we're at it, feel free. But after Leslie and I, have our chat, we will formally open it up for Q&A for 15 to 20 minutes. So be thinking, if you have any questions or comments, there will be time for that. After Q&A, we will have breakout rooms. So you'll be sent to a room to chat with a small group about, reflections or thoughts you want to share in the small group. Then we'll come back to the main large room. And if you'd like, you can share a kind of takeaway you got from the session. And then we'll wrap up. All right. So real quick, for those of you who don't know who the heck I am, let me just tell you who I am and why I'm here. So in 2018, I graduated from George Washington University, where I had written my doctoral dissertation on the lived experiences of modern day polymaths. And I just want to say too, it's a fairly understudied area. So there hasn't been a whole lot of research on modern day polymaths. I do want to say too, the formal definition I like to share, which is by Robert Root Bernstein. I consider him the forefather of polymathy studies. And this is his definition for anyone who's not familiar with what polymathy is. He says it's active engagement, active being important, in multiple being important, interests or endeavors, integrating vocations with avocations, so that's professional life and hobbies, simultaneously or serially across the lifespan. So that's his definition. I just want to put that out there. The other thing I always like to say at the beginning is that polymathy exists on a spectrum. You do not have to be a Leonardo da Vinci to call yourself a polymath. One thing I want to add too is the way I like to think of it is you can be a polymathic person. You can have polymathic tendencies, polymathic ways of thinking and approaching life and work. And sometimes when I say a polymath, I kind of reserve that for like the really strong cases of polymathy. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that you can say I'm a polymathic person. You don't have to say I'm a polymath if that feels uncomfortable for you. All right. Earlier this year, I met Leslie at a class by the Academy of Creative Coaching. And we just hit it off. We've kept in touch all this year. And I felt like we had a lot in common, especially even Leslie, you may recall at the training, I think we had to put up like 4 of our strengths or something, and ours were so similar. And what I really liked about the way Leslie thinks is she's just so strategic and well-spoken. And I'm going to read a little bit about her bio. And then Leslie, if you'd like to add anything else, feel free. Okay, so Dr. Overmeyer-Day is an industrial organizational psychologist. And she said a few minutes ago before we started, psychology is like the psychology of work. So that's why she's here today as my special guest. She has experience in organizational assessment, program and workforce analysis, identifying learning needs and establishing learning strategies, and connecting human capital influences to organizational performance. She leads assessments of readiness for change, employee morale, climate, training needs, skills gaps, training requirements, and outcomes. Dr. Overmeyer-Day is a skilled change management professional and certified coach who works with clients to diagnose root causes of challenges, develop change strategies, and guide clients through that change. Her multiple methods approach to each engagement leads to actionable outcomes, and results from her work have resulted in policy change at the national level. Pretty impressive. Leslie, do you have anything else to add?
Not a lot. I mean, I've been doing this work for about 30 years, and I'm in the DC area. No surprise there that the federal government is a major purchaser of analyses like this. And actually, this whole profession came from, it originated in the Army. And it came from the desire to identify intelligence And they came up with an A test and a B test. An A test, and it's turned into the ASVAB. It's how they select soldiers and determine what jobs they're going into. The A test was for those who could read. The B test was for illiterates. So that was kind of the root of my profession, was going back to intelligence testing. But I've been doing this work, as Angela said, for quite a while, in a pretty much any kind of agency you can think of, primarily in the federal space, but with organizations and teams ranging from just a couple of people to entire departments in the federal government. And a lot of it is being presented with a problem. Oftentimes they'll say, oh, everybody's leaving, nobody's happy, we need training. It's like, do you need training? You know, it's kind of getting at the root cause, and it's almost never training that they need. But it's that process of engaging folks in dialogue and understanding what is the root cause of what's going on here. And I like to say kind of the short answer when people ask me what I do, it's I watch other people work, because ultimately I have to understand what is this business, who are these folks, what is it they do, and understand the different roles people play in an organization, so I can have kind of appreciation for where they sit and what they see as potential improvements or problems in an organization, to have a full scope of what's really going on there and diagnose what's going on. And kind of like I said, it's real quick to say, oh, we have a training problem. Yeah, it's almost never training. You really have to peel back the onion and get a lot of layers. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And before we dive in too much further, I just want to say, like, why are we talking about this? Why does this matter? Well, last meetup, we talked about kind of polymaths in organizations current day and some of the challenges involved in that. So I wanted to spend some time sort of looking forward to the future of work. And my personal opinion is that the future of work may be very, very well suited to polymathic types. Of course, we need specialists still. We're always going to need a mix of both, but there's kind of an underappreciation right now for polymathic talent. And as we talk, you'll see a number of arguments for why polymathic talent may be very, very well suited to the future of work. And why does this matter? Also, a couple of reasons. The pandemic, you know, we're almost at the end of 2020 here, and I'm looking back, looking forward, and, you know, the pandemic has really been a disruptive workforce trend that has forced organizations to sort of change how they do work. So many of us have become remote workers, and, you know, working from home, especially for, you know, for knowledge workers. And will there be, you know, will we go back to normal, or will there be a new normal? So we're going to talk about that. It's timely because of the pandemic. Also, because of technology and all the fast changes with technology, it's also shifting how we work. And it sort of begs the question, you know, as technology takes over more and more grunt work, more and more routinized work, what should the role of the human being be? And the world is becoming more complex. You're seeing more and more at the individual level, people wanting to step into their capacity instead of feeling like they're cogs in an organizational wheel. So given all of these factors, you know, it's helpful to think about, like, well, how can I prepare myself for the future of work, given all the technology changes and also the pandemic, and just, you know, the future of work is changing. I want to share a quote too, before we dive in, from one of the people I interviewed as part of my research. I called her Trinity, and she said, "The idea of picking one career was just horrible. Picking one major was horrible. It's made my professional life easier and richer, being a polymath, but it has made my professional decision-making more difficult. So once I'm in the profession or job or whatever I'm doing, it's definitely easier because I have more to draw on, more tools in your toolkit, and they're readily accessible. But to make decisions about career profession, I think it's more difficult because there's more options." So I just want to throw that out there, that it's one thing to sort of think about and get a job, make decisions, but then it's another to be in it and be able to use your large toolkit as a polymath. Okay, so that's a little bit of preamble. Now I want to ask Leslie a question. Leslie, do you think we're going to go back to how things were after the pandemic, sort of the dust settles, or do you think there's going to be a new normal, and why?
So yeah, and I love this question because everybody's like, I can't wait to go back to the way things were. And it's kind of like, honey, there's no going back. there's only one way and it's forward, right? There is no back. And the other thing is, to me, I've been, in this great pause thinking about what would I want to go back to? Because it's kind of caused a lot of reflection about what was normal and what should be normal. And there was a lot about what we were doing before that wasn't that great. And this feels like it's an opportunity to really question the way we think we were doing some things, assumptions we were making, habits we've adopted, and question whether these are useful anymore. Were they useful then? But really it's kind of no. So the short answer is no. I don't think we're going back to what it was. And there's actually been a lot of discussion in my world, dealing with IO psychologists, and there's a lot of folks that I work with who are studying this whole thing about, what's going to happen next and lessons learned. And we've got to move forward. There's going to be a hesitancy to go back to the way things work for knowledge workers, going back to the office and old assumptions about everybody's got to be together. It's like, do we really? So I think there's going to be a lot of change, or at least a big segment of the workforce.
Yeah, I love what you said too, Leslie, that this idea of, okay, let's think about what was working and what wasn't working. It's easy to forget, like we can each influence our own experiences to some extent. And what do we want to co-create? It's kind of like a do-over. The pandemic has given us a sort of do-over, like what's working and what's not working. And, what do we want to co-create moving forward to work for ourselves? I think, in Europe, I don't think they have a 40-hour work week. And in some countries, they take like a month off work, right? Like they've figured out a way to make it work.
So I'm told. I've had colleagues in Europe that, they get the month of August off. We don't get that. And I'd worked in Germany for a while, years ago. Nobody was putting in 40 hours a week, maybe 32. So yeah, there's an assumption about that 40-hour work week, the commutes that we endured, and the nature of what we're doing, especially in knowledge work. Does it lend itself to a 40-hour work week? I mean, that was all coming out of the unions and factory work back in the day when they were creating shifts. It's like,
right.
Okay, well, that's a 70-year-old, 80-year-old model. And we just kind of morphed it into office work and adopted it. Does it make sense? We didn't really think about it for a long time. And now we have the luxury of thinking about, does this actually work? Does our work have a cycle that demands that kind of rigidity to it? Maybe not.
Rigidity. I want to tap into that because for polymathic individuals, I found in my research, they really value freedom and flexibility. And so having the option, for example, to work from home or to work from wherever you want to work, I would imagine would be quite valuable, especially to polymathic people, or even people who aren't polymathic, who just want to get back some of their day. I can tell you, for me, when I live 13 miles from Washington, D.C., and when I commute in, it costs me about 3 hours between, looking professional and then commuting in, parking, and then the commute back home. I love working from home personally, just because it saves me 3 hours that I can do something else I can do something else in that time. And so it's interesting too, that it could be that this disruptive workforce, the trends that are happening now with more and more remote work is not only like good for organizations and good for performance, as we're going to talk more about, or can be good for performance, but it also could be something that promotes more polymathy. It could bloom and lead to more polymaths emerging, because you may get like me, 3 hours back in your day, and what are you going to do with it? You may try to explore new hobbies, you may get a side gig, and that sort of thing. So Leslie, I want to ask you, do you see any link at all between the work from home people are doing now because of the pandemic, and which I'm guessing will likely continue, at least to some extent, because organizations see it works, it can potentially save money on office space and that sort of thing. So do you see any link between working from home and kind of saving time compared to the old normal, and being able to develop polymathic talent with the time that's saved from not having to commute? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's absolutely conducive to that. Because and I'm the same about you are. It's like if I drive into DC for to commute to the office. It's 3 hours of my day that I don't have available.
Mhm.
And then there's another thing. So you get to the office and you're kind of forced to fill 8 hours. You may not actually have 8 hours worth of work to do, but you can't take advantage of that extra time to do research on whatever you're interested in today. But now that you've got this flexibility of working from home and nobody really checking in or walking by the way they used to,
Mhm.
and you have both the luxury and the responsibility of restructuring your day. So you're clearly working in your day job, but you can probably restructure a good bit of that day around, well, I have to be at these meetings, I have to get these tasks done, but you may have 2 hours in the middle of the day that you don't have to look busy, and you can start to research something else you're interested in or engage in your side hustle or whatever. But as long as you're getting your work done,
Mhm.
you, like I said, you have a responsibility, but it's that luxury. And I think, yeah, you've got this potential to just take advantage of that extra time and potentially do deeper research on a topic that you would have been able to do if you actually were forced to go in the office and couldn't, explore
Mhm.
that topic area. But I think, yeah, if you have the discipline though to actually get the day job done too,
Right.
and find those pockets of time. And I think it also helps if you have enough time to devote to something new. It's not just 10-minute bursts here and there, although that may work for you. But if you literally have an afternoon free, you may be able to devote that to whatever your other interests might be. And I've found that as I'm working from home doing these things, there are things that pop up that would have been just something I was mildly interested in. And I'm running that down a little bit further, doing a little bit deeper dive, and I'm finding connections back to things I can apply on the job. It's actually giving me an opportunity to really process this information and connect it and bring it to the job.
Mhm.
Whereas before I might have just been interested in it just because it was some cool thing, but I wouldn't have seen the connection and be able to apply it to a project. So
Mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's in a matter of how we're using our time. But yeah, just the fact that we may have more of it, that is
Mhm.
not lost to things like commuting or, worrying about what we're going to wear today and make sure we have a lunch packed. Um, that definitely, I think, creates an opportunity for it.
Yeah. The other thing too, I just want to observe is that y- not having a daily commute, it certainly saves time, but for me anyway, it also preserves my energy. So when I do go to work, I'm bringing sort of a fresher version of myself as opposed to someone who's been up very early that morning, putting on a suit and makeup, and then stressing in my commute. Am I going to be on time? Am I going to be late? You know what I mean? So just the energy I bring to my work is sort of a more relaxed, energized version of me, not the, oh my God, I'm already frazzled when I get to work at 8:30 version.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of like, when you're on the commute, you could have left the house in a glorious mood and been really organized in your head about all the things you were going to get done. But if you had a terrible commute, it sets the tone for the day, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have that now. We just don't have it. It's absent. So every day it's a new opportunity without those inconveniences that can kind of come in and derail your mood.
Yeah, exactly. Leslie, I heard you say a couple times now, you talked about the 40 hours a week. And, in the old world, productivity and contribution, it to some extent was measured by butt in seat for 40 hours or more. But so I want to ask you, if we're not measuring productivity and value added in the organization by 40 hours, for example, how else should we be looking at and thinking about the value an employee adds in exchange for their salary?
That's a really good question. And I think it even predates COVID, because how were we weren't, I don't think we were accurately measuring performance anyway. Because the 40-hour a week requirement it's an attendance requirement. It's not actually measuring your performance at all. It's
Right.
just, were you present or were you absent? And there's an assumption that presence equals good employee. And I don't think that's the case by a long shot. But it does call into question, how should we be measuring people's performance? And one of the challenges that I know COVID has really hit a lot of the old school managers, and I work with one of them who was, I got to walk around the floor and count noses today. And this threw them. They don't know how to manage people in a remote setup at all. They, it's affected them more than their employees. Yeah, in terms of measuring performance, we do need to think what matters. It gets back to that basic kind of question about, well, what is it that we hired you to do? And sometimes that's unclear, and you're kind of demonstrating what you're capable of. But as your work evolves, it's like, well, what's your contribution to the team, to the task, to the mission of this organization? It's getting creative with understanding what really matters, and then what is it you're bringing? Are you bringing you're just super productive and you can do things quickly? Is it your accuracy? Is it your tenacity? Is it your creativity? Is it your ability to pull the team together? These are things that in the real world really do matter, but they haven't really been adequately addressed or acknowledged as the true measures of performance. And I think now that we're kind of forced to think about it differently, because we can't observe everybody, to that whole point. It's like, if you've got a couple free hours, you might want to go explore your other project. You're not being observed constantly and measured on attendance. How can we actually know what our employees are doing and that they're actually contributing? And even further, who's doing it really well and who's just getting by?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I heard from some of the people I interviewed as well was they really want bandwidth to take on special projects, to learn new things, to upskill themselves. And so I think in general, as we consider how do you measure performance, how do you measure value added, the typical polymath will do their job, and then they'll want to look for ways to learn more, add more, explore more as it pertains to their work. So there's this hunger for self-improvement that you see in polymath. So when we think about work looking more and more like that, where maybe we're looking differently at the metrics of contribution, I think polymaths may they may be in a good light, because they tend to be the kind that wants to take on those special projects and learn and grow, and not just do the basic requirements of their job. Leslie, let's talk. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about if there are ways we can actually, we used to call them self-starters, which is the most horrible term, it's in every job description too, that you see posted. Oh, we want a real self-starter. It's like, okay, who's going to admit they're not? But it's that initiative of, I'm interested in this and I'm going to dive in and learn it, or I see a problem and I'm really intrigued and I'm going to take the initiative to learn more about it and try to solve it. But how do we recognize that? How do we demonstrate that we value it and reward it? But yeah, that needs to be brought into that conversation about performance measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Leslie, I want to touch now on, we both sort of mentioned about knowledge workers. So I know you and I are both knowledge workers, and so working remotely has worked for us. Do you have any thoughts on people who aren't knowledge workers, people like grocery store workers or fast food employees, especially in the current context with the pandemic? What are your thoughts on non-knowledge workers?
So in terms of long-term impacts on them and new ways of doing work, that's a really good question. I think it's a bit of an unknown. And I think, the pandemic has demonstrated, or really turned on its head, who we thought were the most important people in society, essentially, who were the most critical to making the whole thing run. And it turns out it's often the lowest paid people, and people who've been invisible are critically important to our well-being. The sad part that I see coming down the pike, it's not here yet, but it's coming like a freight train, is a lot of the jobs these folks are in, whether it's stocking shelves in grocery stores, fast food, truck driving, they're going to be automated away. So there actually won't be anywhere for them to go. I think that's a longer term impact. As far as what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, that's a really good question, but I'd sure like to see them paid more and taken care of. But in terms of how they're actually, will their work be restructured in a way that's more recognizing of their contribution? I don't know. I'm a little bit pessimistic about that, to be perfectly honest. We have short memories.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to touch on something there as well. Like as we think about how can we each individually sort of handle financial uncertainty, like jobs pay, and some jobs pay more and some jobs pay less. One benefit of being polymathic is you have more of a safety net potentially. You have more gigs that you can do, side gigs or side hustles. And I want to share another quote from someone I interviewed who I called Wendy in my dissertation. And she said, I feel like I have more optionality and more kind of irons in the fire. Should a life change happen or should an economy change happen? I feel like I have a safety net in my polymath skills that maybe I didn't have or don't have from like a financial or family perspective. And quite honestly, that may have been what drove me to continue to develop multiple skill sets and multiple networks and multiple paths. I'm never quite certain which came first, the chicken or the egg there. And she came from a relatively poor family. So I just want to point that out too, that, as the economy is shifting and like work gets automated and certain tasks are taken over by tech, developing your own polymathic skills can become a sort of safety net for you because you're not pigeonholed into one sort of task or role. So it can be something that you purposefully decide to develop in yourself so you have optionality, like Wendy said. Do you have any thoughts on that, Leslie?
I agree that it gives you, it's just a basic tendency because the interests are vast, that it kind of enables you to be able to pivot more quickly. If one area, you may be super interested in it, but is it going to support you? No. So you're able to kind of look at the array of things that I'm interested in and things I'm potentially good at or even good enough at to make a living. Yeah, it gives you more options.
Yeah.
It gets to that notion of the hyper specialist. It's like, boy, can they command a lot of money when there's a need for them? But when that need goes away, they're the first ones in the unemployment line and probably the longest ones there.
Yeah.
So when the specialty dries up, it's like, what now? If they're not really accustomed to branching out, if they're not capable of it or comfortable doing that, what do they do?
Yeah, it's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Yeah. Next, I want to share a framework with you guys. I'm working on a book called Polymaths in the Business Organization, and I came up with this for the book that I want to share with you guys. I don't think I've shared this publicly yet. But I've come up with this kind of 2 types framework. That's what I'm calling it. Where, in my opinion, if you look in an organization in any given role, the jobs in that organization will probably tend towards one of 2 types. The job itself will either be kind of routine, stable work, like think of accounting or something like that, just very routine and stable. Or there's work that is kind of more chaotic. It's kind of in a wicked, it has wicked problems to face, harsh learning environments, or VUCA, challenges to deal with. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So think of something like IT security or something like that. And so if you can see that, yes, there do tend to be 2 types of roles, then we need to think strategically, in my opinion, about what types of people fit in those roles. And right now, the dominant ideology is that of specialization. The vast majority of organizations, when they consider who to hire, want specialists. They just want to see this story of specialization. And frequently, if they don't see that on your resume, they will pass it over and go to the next one. But in my opinion, specialists are not suited to every job. And the way I think of it is specialists are kind of like the knowers. The knowers, that's the term I've given them. They are paid to be deep experts and to know the answers. Whereas the other type of employee that is well suited to sort of the difficult VUCA, wicked, harsh positions, I think of as learners. When you have a wicked, VUCA, harsh environment, you don't want someone who's just going to want routine and stability in that role, because that's not a solution to the problems in that role. You need someone who's willing to learn and adapt and be resilient and figure things out. And so in my opinion, the 2 types framework, what I'm trying to explain is there's 2 types of roles, and then there's knowers and learners that fit in those roles. And learners are people who, they're upskilling themselves as well. When you hire someone who's polymathic, who's a learner, continual learner, they're going to be improving their skill set. So in a way, organizations who hire polymathic talent are getting more payoff for that role, because they're getting someone who's going to morph and evolve as the times change. So before I go any further, because I feel like I've been talking a long time, Leslie, what do you think of this framework? Do you think this makes sense, that there's two basic types at a very high level, two types of positions, and then two types of people, generally speaking, that tend to fit in those kinds of roles in organizations? Does that make sense to you? And also, go ahead.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And actually, not my current team, but the team I was on the last time, the environment we worked in was absolute chaos. We were in it was a new organization that was going through a lot of rapid growth, and there were no rules. The structure was very loose, but it was inside of a bureaucracy. So this was kind of the worst case scenario, right? Because bureaucracies are rigid, they are structured, they are organized, they're predictable. And this was the emergence of a new bureaucracy. When I would hire people on the team to come and join us, I would ask them point blank, what is your tolerance for ambiguity? And the reaction they gave really made it was a critical point in whether we were going to bring them onto that team or not. Because if they were folks who needed predictability and structure, and I come in, I know my job, I know what's expected of me, these are my inputs, my throughputs, my outputs, I know where I fit. If that's who they were, we knew that was not going to work. We needed those folks who could make a decision. That's critical. If you can make a decision in the midst of all that chaos and constant change, you were going to make it, right? Because you just got to figure stuff out. Sometimes you've got to figure it out. And if you have that natural temperament, and if you're interested in a lot of things, because it was you never know what it's going to be today. Today we're going to be going in this direction. Nope, the boss changed their mind. We're going in that direction. And you have to learn a whole new subject matter to go with it. The folks who could adapt, who were learners, and that's a great term for them, but that was one of the characteristics. They had a tolerance for ambiguity. They didn't get ruffled when things changed, and they could make a decision without having all the information. Right? But that there's a fine line, though, because as you're growing an organization, especially if it's going to be a bureaucracy, you've got to have some of those folks who are on the other end of that spectrum. They've got to have that. They're the doers. They're the ones who are going to build it. They're going to give you the rules to follow, or at least general parameters, so the learners can go off and do this. If you have only one or only the other, it is a dead organization or on its way, or it's complete chaos. So you really do need to have both.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say too, based on my interviews with polymathic people, I think most of them actually tend to get energized by challenges and puzzles. Like maybe there's a limit, I guess, like maybe there is a limit to how much they can sort of bear at once with change and chaos. But a lot of them they would be very bored if their jobs were very routine and stable. And so having a sort of challenge that they can sink their teeth into is kind of energizing. It's an opportunity for learning. So I think they would like that. Leslie, you touched upon interviewing, and I want to quickly share some examples I've identified for how, if you are ever interviewing someone else to fill a position on your team, what can you ask to figure out, they're more of a specialist knower, or are they more of a polymathic learner? And so here are a few examples you may ask if you were trying to fill a specialist knower role. You could say something like, please tell us about your prior experience doing the kind of work that this job requires. Tell us about your educational background as it pertains to this position. And why do you enjoy doing the kind of very focused labor that this position demands? And on the other hand, if you were asking or interviewing somebody for a more polymathic generalist, VUCA, wicked, harsh role, you could ask, for them to tell you about the different types of skills that person has, and how that variety of skills could apply or inform the work at hand. You could ask, please share examples of where you've innovated using information from multiple perspectives or disciplines. Share an example. You could just ask, do you think of yourself more of a in the weeds or a big picture thinker? And in my opinion, probably the knowers would be a bit more in the weeds and the learners would be a bit more big picture thinkers. Of course, a good polymath can do both, but they would always remember the big picture, I would think. The point is, you'll want to understand how they think. So instead of just focusing necessarily on specific past experiences or skills, you want to dig a bit deeper and figure out, how do they tend to think? How do they, are they more knowers or are they more learners? Do they like to envision and create solutions outside of the box? Or are they more focused on sort of executing very focused day-to-day tasks in a prescribed, reliable way? What else? Leslie, should we talk a bit about hyper specialization for a second?
We can. I want to build
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Go for it.
on what you were just saying, though, with the interview questions, because this is
Yes.
and the whole notion of hiring, and human resources, where I think they've got it dead wrong. This is where I really fault a lot of folks in my profession, because HR is it's on the I side of industrial organizational site. And most of the positions you see out there advertised are written for last year's or the job they needed to refill 2 years ago. It's very backward looking, and it is based on a very prescribed skill set they were looking for to solve the problem of yesterday. And it isn't hiring for tomorrow and the general capabilities and the competencies of what we're going to need down the road. And I think that approach is something that I've been trying to work with some of my clients, because some of the organizations I work with, they really need to have just a stable full of polymaths because of the nature of what they're doing. They're very innovative in their R&D, and they're like their projects have these 20-year timelines. You can't tell me the skills you have today are going to be the skills you're going to need 20 years from now. You need people who have that ability and that desire to grow and learn as the work changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the jobs, the job postings you'll see are written for yesterday and for specialists and for a specific problem set. So that is kind of stacked against a polymath. But there are other questions you can ask too. I love the questions. If I'm really trying to dig into know how somebody's going to approach it,
Mm-hmm.
I'll give them a problem. Or tell me about a time when you had a project that didn't work out, right? And ask, what did you learn from that? Have them describe what happened, pull lessons learned to see, and what would you do differently next time, right? What do you wish you knew then that you know now that would have saved it? Kind of get an understanding of their thought process. But we can put people, and we've done this before, you put them in kind of realistic scenarios and have them explain how they would apply. Because it's one thing to say, I have this skill set, but it's another to actually have them kind of demonstrate
Mm-hmm.
or explain to you in a scenario, well, how would you approach this? And then you can kind of see how they think. And are they very rigid, or they have a toolkit and they pull this out now, well, I would just apply, Dr. So-and-so's, model of blah, 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 and you have your checklists and this and that. It's like, okay. Or is it someone who is going to approach it very differently and say, well, first I'd ask about this, right? Try to find out more about that. And, you can really get a sense of their approach to work by having
Mm-hmm.
them work through scenarios. So
Yeah. And I would imagine a polymathic person would be better positioned to sort of look at things from multiple perspectives and multiple angles, maybe even from their prior experience in different fields or different roles, as opposed to a narrow specialist who may see something, from a more siloed perspective potentially.
But they're going to be more creative in how they even approach it. They may get the answer dead wrong. They may give you some solution that would never work, but at least you can see what their thought process is and kind of
Mm-hmm.
get a flavor for their creativity.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. You said something a minute ago too, Leslie, like growing and learning as a job changes. And I just want to point out how in a rapidly changing world like we're in, especially if you work in an industry that's sort of fast paced and has a lot of, rapid changes, that being a learner is helpful in helping you sort of stay employed. Because if you just keep doing things yesterday, or today, like you did yesterday, if you're like the knower type, the specialist type, and your environment is rapidly changing, like there's just going to be a real disconnect there. So polymathy can be a way of better preparing yourself for change, for change in the the economy, for change in your organization, that sort of thing.
And I would see them being the ones where the boss brings them the problem or asks a question, and they say, you'll go to one person and say, I don't know, and it's like, how do you do X, Y, Z? I don't know. They'll go to the polymath and they'll say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about technology too, because of course we can't ignore the role of tech and how quickly it's evolving and how that's going to impact the future of work. And I've given this a bit of thought, and I realized, as tech takes over more and more sort of routinized grunt work, I don't know how else to say it, as artificial intelligence automates a lot of what our work do, for me, it really begs the question, well, what is the role of human being? And I don't mean this year or next year. I just mean for 10, 20, 30, 40, the next 50 years, as work really changes, what should the role of a human being be? And what I think the role should be is to be creative, to add unique human value. And that is done through being creative, being innovative, seeing the bigger picture and making links, building bridges, coming up with solutions, forging those links between disciplines even. And so those are all things I want to point out. Those are all things that polymaths are really good at, because they don't exist in silos. They exist at the intersection of multiple disciplines. They're really good typically at seeing the bigger picture and making those linkages, building those bridges. So, Leslie, how do you think about technology and the type of work that people will be doing in the future? And do you think people with polymathic talent are better suited to that future world?
Yeah, I mean, and this is huge, and you kind of can't get away from it. Everybody and their brother is taking on a digital transformation initiative right now. And I'm the one who sits back and say, what does that mean? Because at the end of it, it's like, the work is the work. And it's like, I always come at it, I guess, because I'm a psychologist. It's like, how is this going to affect the people? The work has to determine what we're changing, what we're automating, where it makes sense to introduce AI. And I don't even like the term AI because I think it's overused. I've actually heard someone say we shouldn't call it artificial intelligence, we call it artificial intellect, because intelligence is the much broader spectrum, and that includes the human capacity for emotion.
Mm-hmm.
AI is really logic. It is intellect. It is pure, it's much narrower.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is. So where do people intersect with this? It's like, let the machines do what the machines are good at, and take away the stuff we hate, the dirty work, the ugly work, the boring work, and free up space for people to be creative and to think more holistically, and to and free up your space from doing the things that are boring and routine that involve no creativity, to, okay, what is the next thing to evolve all of this body of work? Because if you don't have that free space to learn and think about not only how can I make this better, but what's next? Why are we doing this anyway? What value does this add?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's that freeing people up to add that human component that machines will never have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Next, I want to shift gears a little bit, Leslie, and talk about, I'll just be honest, Leslie and I were chatting the other day and she said something, so I'm just going to, that's how we touched upon it. She said something that really struck me, and she talked about people getting unconscious in their work. And that when work is rote and routine, and you're just sort of, doing the same thing over and over again, how there's a sort of unconsciousness that can sort of fill your mental space. You just sort of are doing it without really being alive to it. So, Leslie, can you tell me what comes up for you when you think of sort of unconsciousness in one's work, and how polymathy versus specialist may tend to do that more or less?
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day. It actually is an issue that comes up in many aspects of our lives. It's driving is one of them. We just, once you've been driving for a number of years, most of all of that becomes so habitual, you're not really attending to it the same way you were when you were 15 or 16 and learning how to drive. But we were talking about the fact that most of us are on autopilot throughout our day at work. and including people who are hyper specialists or masters of what they do. And I find this most often when we're doing job analysis, right? Where something new is coming down the pike. Here's a scenario. It's like, we're going to introduce this new tool in the workplace, and we have to talk to the subject matter experts to really understand what their job is, to know how this tool will be used by them. So when you first sit down with someone who is an expert at their job, and you ask them a very simple question, tell me what you do, they freak out because they can't explain it, because they have become, it's habitual. It's who they are, right? And it's like they don't even think about it anymore. It's just, what do you mean? I do this thing. No, break it down. No, what do you really do? And it's a process of really forcing them to stop and consciously unpack the stuff that they just take for granted. They just do these things, right? It happens to everybody, right? But for master's level people, it is really kind of remarkable. And actually, when I'm working with experts, particularly when we are writing training, I like to work with more junior people because they're in a better position to break it down for you and explain procedurally how things go, because it's newer and fresher for them, and they still have to attend to it. They have to pay attention to not make a mistake, to build their proficiency. When you've got someone who's fully proficient at doing these tasks, they really have great difficulty in explaining how they do what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Leslie, I want to shift gears a little bit again to a bit of a different take on polymathy in the workplace. So one of the ways I think about polymathy, another term I use for it, is being intrapersonally diverse, having diversity within yourself in terms of the experiences that you've had professionally or in your hobbies. And so, we hear organizations talk about how important diversity is, diversity of thought, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of those things, which do matter. But there is another kind of diversity, in my opinion, which should also matter to organizations, and that's intrapersonal diversity in individuals where, based on the work that they'd be doing, that would make sense. And so, as we think about the value of diversity in organizations, Leslie, what comes up for you? Do you think organizations should value this kind of experiential diversity in their employees?
I think, should they? Yeah, just as they would any other. What I find though is oftentimes they don't. And a lot of that's driven by the culture of the organization, because being different in any definition of the word is almost never rewarded. Conformity still kind of rules. But yeah, and particularly if the mission of the organization or the nature of the work requires, if you're working in a VUCA world, if you need to be creative, if you need to be connecting different people, connecting different teams, connecting different processes, you do need that ability to be diverse intrapersonally in what you bring to understand the range of things you're looking at and dealing with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a blind spot in a lot of organizations. They don't recognize that they need that. And it kind of goes back to, remember that job description we had, it was hiring for that skill set from 5 years ago. It's like it wasn't important. We didn't hire for it, but do we need it? We absolutely do. That kind of blinders on approach and the narrow skill set often runs afoul of when organizations say we need to be agile. Because I have a lot of them that say it's one of the things we really need to become more agile. How are you going to do that? That's exactly what you need. You need people who can bring this wealth of experience. Yeah, bring a different perspective and are open to things. That's what's at the nature of agility. It's not just picking one up and plugging and playing them over here. We've now changed seats. It's how do you repurpose people and tap into their innate ability to apply them to a different problem set.
Yeah, it sort of makes an organization more ambidextrous the more polymaths they have. And when put in the chat, I think it's a good point that it's a kind of, neurodiversity. Polymaths bring a kind of neurodiversity that organizations really don't explicitly seek out necessarily. And if they did, it could better position them to be agile, to be flexible, to change with the times in a more flexible way, rather than having, more fixed narrow specialists all across the organization, which sort of puts them in a more rigid position.
I think we need more folks in HR who can explain that, because I don't think they have the language around it to organize the work that way, or to categorize the work that way, so they don't know what to look for.
Exactly.
But it keeps popping up as an organizational requirement. We need people who can think on their feet, who can pivot, who can do these things. But it doesn't translate down into HR and how they are creating the positions, how they're advertising positions, what what the criteria are that they're using, the interview questions. There's a disconnect there. And it's between who we're hiring and how we're finding them, who tend not to be polymathic, at least not in, probably polymaths are slipping through, but it's not what they're seeking. But then what the organization truly needs, there's this rub. They just are not getting what they need.
Yeah. If you want people who think outside the box, then stop picking people who stuff themselves into narrow specialist boxes.
And stop rewarding that too, because it kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about performance measurement and what matters. It's like, we are rewarding you for producing X team, so many widgets. This is your number. You showed up to work every day. We're rewarding you because you brought this capability, take this piece of business that rapidly shifted over to this and assemble a team and pull the team together, and you put order to chaos. We're not rewarding that. We're rewarding the checklist, right? Yep. Oh, well, we see you produce this many and you didn't miss this, and you had, oh, excellent, but instead of this larger, more holistic way of thinking about what was your true contribution.
Yeah. There's a whole cascade of things that need to cascading effect of if organizational leaders can see there do tend to be two basic types of positions, and the hiring that you should do for those two types of positions should be strategic and directed, then it's not just hiring either. It's the development, it's the retention of those people that are going to be different as well. One other thing, and then we're going to shift to Q&A soon because we've almost been at this for an hour already. Let's talk about polymaths in leadership positions as a final topic here. In my opinion, polymathic people may be particularly well suited to leadership positions when they're leading diverse teams, functionally diverse teams. Because if they've had exposure to those different functions, if they can speak those kind of professional languages, of course, they're going to be better suited to managing that diverse team. Now, if somebody is managing a team of very narrow specialists, probably makes sense to have a very narrow specialist leading that team. The other thing I want to say too, based on the interviews I conducted, is that not every polymath is going to be suited to a leadership role. There were some polymaths I interviewed who were real people persons, who really liked figuring out challenges and puzzles and working with other people, and who would be particularly well suited to leading diverse teams in VUCA harsh, wicked environments. But there were other polymaths who really preferred solo work, research, writing, artistic stuff, text, whatever they preferred. The bottom line is they preferred working alone. And so if you put a polymathic person in a role where they're having to supervise or manage teams, they're probably not going to like that. So I just want to point out, not every polymath is suited to a leadership role, but for people who do like being in that kind of a role, supervising or managing people, if they've had broad functional experiences and they're managing a team of broad function, multiple functions, they are particularly well suited, in my opinion. Leslie, do you think that makes sense? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. In the distinction you were making about not every polymath is suited to it, nor is every specialist suited to leadership. That's true regardless. I think that's where you get kind of the multidimensionality of personality. Because some people are just introverts. I don't want to say they make terrible leaders, because they don't always. Sometimes they make great ones, but they're not going to be necessarily the most charismatic. And some extroverts make terrible leaders because they're too out. But I think it's being polymathic in is one aspect of who a person is, can bring a lot to the table as far as being a really good manager or being a really good leader, because they can understand a lot of different technical things more readily than a specialist might. You know, at least they're looking across a range of things. They have a different orientation to problem solving and considering different perspectives than a specialist might. Because again, specialists, most that I've known, got a toolkit and they're pulling that toolkit out all the time. And if it's not in their toolkit, it's like, no, they just don't have a solution.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, it's complex, but I do think there's definitely a place for more polymathic thinking and approaches in leadership. And I think especially in organizations that want to go forward and are forward thinking and leaning and innovative, you've got to have that kind of leadership.
Mhm. At the end of the day, polymathic people are learners. They're learners. And so even learning how to effectively supervise or manage or encouraging your employees to sort of upskill through their own learning. There's just a general appreciation for learning. And so that's another reason why I think not everybody, but some polymathic people may be particularly well suited to management and supervisory roles, because they're going to be learning how to improve the work they do, and they're going to want their employees to be doing the same, continue learning. All right. Well, we have already been talking for about an hour. Let's switch gears now and move into Q&A. Shrikant, do you want to share any rules?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have 4 rules. Number 1, to ask a question, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. At this point, mostly questions. What we're going to do is after this, we're going to do breakout rooms. And then when we come back, you'll have plenty of time to talk about your takeaways. And the 4th, speak your mind, disagree with anybody on anything, and do so courteously. So it's going to be Jeff, Joe, Vanessa, Laura, Christine, and Christine. Jeff, go ahead.
So thank you so much for this great conversation. I am so oriented and sympathetic to your point of view that I can't even take a non-polymathic approach to discussing polymaths. So what I want to do is show you a picture that I've drawn and then just have a little conversation about it. Okay?
Okay.
So there's the picture. And the picture is basically saying that clearly there are some people who are very high polymaths. They're in that top, strata there. But in certain ways they're a blend, and in other ways they're just straight up, high polymath. And there's some people who are going to be down at the level of what I'm just calling expert right now. But even an expert, I don't want people who are simply just rote, performer experts. I want them to be able to think creatively. So I want a little bit of blend out of them. And then there are some folks who are both expert and polymath, and I expect them to bring that to their work. And so I've actually headed up organizations and hired folks for these various jobs that required those kinds of things. And I'm wondering what you think of that, that really there is nobody who is necessarily all one way or another. I obviously have a very high tolerance for ambiguity, but there are actually everybody who is somewhat of a blend. And it's a matter of sort of emphasis and, intensity and, an amount in one of those areas.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to see you. Absolutely. I mean, how polymathic someone is or not definitely exists on a spectrum, with like the deep, narrow expert being on one end of that spectrum, and the polymath, like a Leonardo da Vinci at the other end. But most of us exist somewhere in between those two. The way I usually think of it, and Michael Araki, if you're familiar with his work, he talks a lot about depth and breadth and integration. That's another way of thinking about it too, is how deep in any given area, are your skill sets, how much breadth do you have? And breadth is key. Like, you really cannot be a polymathic person without the breadth, because then you just have depth and you're a narrow specialist, or you don't have breadth and I don't know what you are, but integration is interesting too, because what he means by that is like, how much are you linking together the different factors, the different fields, the different domains where you have expertise? Are you doing analogical thinking? Are you bringing tools from one area to another to be creative and innovative? But yeah, absolutely. There is a range, like you said, and it's not just one or another. And as we go through our lives, like where we are on that spectrum may shift as well.
Next up is going to be Joe, Vanessa, and Laura. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, great conversation, Angela and Leslie. It was wonderful. This is a really important topic as well, and I have 100 different questions, but the one I'm probably going to start with is the idea of job descriptions from the past and the future. So when you hire a person in, they're hired into a organization. So it's still, they're subject to the organizational structure that currently exists. So I've seen this where people, not only the way they design and even build products, no matter how the job was described to them, they're still beholden to the way things are being done. So my question is then, how do you break down those organizational silos? The only one that I could actually come up with is the idea of empowering people with data and structuring their information so that people can access it. And that's kind of create a break down the silos with informationally, and that's through digital transformation. And that's where I look at it as something as automation facilitating that in a way, because you have to structure your data, and there's a lot that goes into automation. So but I'm wondering, is there any way that you look at how you break down the information silos once somebody gets hired, no matter what the job description it may be, especially if you're being hired into an organization that is siloed by nature?
Yeah, I have some thoughts, and then Leslie, if you have anything else to add, feel free to jump in. It's a really good point, like Leslie originally started, that when you're hiring based on what the organization looks like today. And by the way, like in my primary role in government, hiring can take 3 to 6 months. So, and getting a job description changed can take forever. So it is a real challenge. How to break down silos? I mean, I think it comes down to communicating, sharing experiences. I think things like job rotations, where you allow people to, have their primary role and maybe do a part-time or even a full-time rotation for a few months, is really helpful. Allowing for job shadowing so people can learn about different areas, different positions. Having cross-functional teams, like just the way teams are structured. You can have a team of teams with cross-functional people, so that way they're learning from one another on a day-to-day basis. Just information sharing, things like shadowing or interviews or mentors or newsletters, having some sort of emails that go out to employees to let people know about the functions that are taking place. Just information sharing in general, and the way you think about organizations. Like, can you break down those silos? It really starts in how you think about what the work you're doing and how you communicate that. Leslie, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess it's a matter of perspective on what role are you in when you're trying to break down the silos. So if you're the new guy hired in and you're seeing that I'm bringing all of this experience in this, they thought they wanted me as a whole person and all this creativity I bring, but now I'm just a cog. And I'm stuck in this process, this structure that doesn't really work. It's incredibly difficult to inspire change from that position. More often than not, what happens is over time, you'll have a problem with morale or productivity, because people at some point give up and the organization's not doing what it's designed to do. But eventually it percolates to the top, where you'll have management with this whole dichotomy. We need to be agile, yet here's where we're at. At some point, somebody wakes up and sees that we have a disconnect in how we are structured and doing things and what we aspire to be. And usually that's when we go through a change management process of some kind to either redesign the work, get rules out of the way, come up with new ways of doing things, and to pull that person in who came in who was disgruntled or disappointed that the job they were hired in for is not the job they got. Those are the folks I like to pull in to help do the redesign. Because it's really, I find it really helpful to pull in the incumbents in the job to help shape what it should be, because they're usually in the very best position to tell you how things could be done better. But it has to be balanced with that view of, and always keep that touchstone. What's our mission? What's our, what are the things that we can't change? What are the parameters we have to live within? But then where's our free space to come up with a new way of doing it? So, I mean, it's a difficult position, and it's very, very hard if you're the one in that job. Very hard to be the one changing the system, because essentially that's kind of what I'm hearing you say. It's like, how do we get the system to change to accommodate how cool we are and take advantage of all this stuff that we're able to do? It really has to be a combination of things, and they have to reach a critical pain point where the organization's just not doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
And it has to hit their brain pan that, oh, what are we going to do?
Now, is that where automation actually can free up that space and create? And that's where, and so that's the way I look at it. Because if you're doing automation, you're structuring your information, it's going somewhere, it has to go to a library or something, right? Then this information becomes available where it's no longer siloed within even an enterprise system. So that this is you're creating space through automation that then allows you to create that organizational change. But again, I think that's where, that's the advantage. That's the only thing that I've been able to come up with, is to break down a silo within a archaic kind of organizational dynamic.
I actually think it takes more than that. That's a component of it, but there are huge cultural barriers too. So they have to, I mean, at the end of the day, we can automate everything. We can come up with really elegant systems and really cool tools, but if the culture is all about status quo, it's never going to change. And if leadership is not bought in and doesn't see the value of it, and what I've found too is the most critical folks in an organization to make an initiative live or die is middle management. Because you often find the folks at the bottom who suffer under the way things are done, and they see that things need to change. Leadership will want things to change, but if you don't have the buy-in of that middle layer, because those are the folks who are most often threatened by change and automation, you're getting rid of me. There will no longer be a need for me. If you've got to find a way to get their buy-in, understand what the impacts will be on them. How will their job change as a result of automation or redesigning work or redesigning the organization? The reality is we've learned lessons over the past couple decades. There have been periods of time where industry and government and the military just hacked out that middle layer of management. It's like we're streamlining or flattening the organization. It doesn't work. The reality is you have to have that layer there. They serve a critical function in any organization. It's a matter of figuring out what's in it for them, what changes for them, what they will probably drastically change a lot. It's helping figure out how will that change and change and kind of redesign their work and their role.
That was wonderful, Leslie. Thanks. Next up is going to be Vanessa, Laura, Christine, Barry, and Daniel. Vanessa, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's my first, I guess, class, I was going to say, my first live session. I kind of actually came because the word polymath was actually giving me a hard time. I think the word math in it, I just thought, well, I got to go and listen to it because I think it's just a term. I was more into the scanner and the multi-passionista one. So I figure I know Angela and Leslie had quite some experience in that. So I thought I'd come and get a different perspective, not kind of stay stuck with a term. And I do feel that I kind of belong in that sense. And my question to you, I guess it could be to both of you and maybe some of you guys that are listening, is for me as polymath and difficult for me to conform, in the way, the structure where, because I want to do different things. I ended up leaving the corporate world and going more into the self-entrepreneur, and trying to do different things at the same time. And my hardship has been into structure. And I think that's the part that the big companies have, where you have a structure and you have to follow, obviously. And for me is coming together with a structure for myself that works and that could give me productivity in the long run. As polymath, my mind just kind of goes one place, one kind of another. And I've been told about different techniques to follow or different ways to do it, but I feel that I'm still not grounded in a way to just make this work, to make my activity, which is really important and very valuable, to go into a direction as sturdy as it could be in a corporate world. I don't know if my questions makes any sense to you.
A couple of things, Vanessa. Good to see you here. Polymath, the word, I just want to, it's not about mathematics at all. In Greek, the word manthanin means learn, and poly, of course, means many. So many learnings is basically what it means. It has nothing to do with mathematics. It's not the greatest word, though. I don't think we have a perfect word for this phenomenon. But I like the word polymath, so that's what I use. And absolutely, regarding entrepreneurship, I should have mentioned that earlier as we're talking about, work and the future of work. Many polymaths have trouble working for organizations, especially organizations who want them to sort of fit in this box and don't allow the freedom and flexibility that a polymathic person prefers. So many polymaths choose to become entrepreneurs and maybe even forge their multiple interests into some unique gig sometimes too. But that is fraught with its own challenges and risks. And of course, one of the difficulties of being a polymath can be kind of focusing. So if you want to achieve a certain goal, sometimes it does require hunkering down and having bursts of focused energy and focused attention in order to get something done. So, but I think that's doable. Polymaths, being polymathic doesn't mean you can't focus or you can't achieve. It just means you like a lot of things. You're stimulated by variety and especially learning about lots of different things, which can be, it can make you very well suited to be an entrepreneur because usually entrepreneurs are wearing multiple hats. So I just want to mirror back. I'm not sure I have an answer for you. I just want to validate that, yes, many polymaths become entrepreneurs because they're not happy with their experience in organizations, which tend to be very siloed and have, routinized jobs, forcing people into the box. But yeah, productivity and getting things done. If you prefer lots of switching, it can be a little dizzying if you're an entrepreneur and you may need to hunker down sometimes to get things done. Leslie, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, but the same thing strikes me too. Many organizations aren't set up for, especially those that are older in many cases, although I don't even want to use that as a characteristic. It's those that, I guess look at the type of business it's in. They tend to, again, reward conformity. Most organizations that have been around for a while, the larger tend to be more bureaucratic, but I don't really want to paint it with a broad brush. If you're looking for a position and you want to look for work and not be self-employed or be an entrepreneur, look for organizations that value entrepreneurialism. There are many out there that they may be huge, but they're actually conglomerations of lots of little businesses that actually are set up as little kind of entrepreneurial cultures. That's one way to kind of screen them. Don't make an assumption that if it's a 50,000 employee organization, it's going to be very bureaucratic. It may not be. There are some companies I'm thinking of, like 3M. They actually reward people for being very creative. They would take people off. Years ago, they were known for doing this. You would get a certain percentage of your time where you weren't working for the company, you were creating. And that's how they came up with things like Scotch tape, right? But it's a matter of do your research on the companies and the organizations you're looking at, because size is not necessarily a given that they're going to be very rigid. How old they are, because some of them, just because they've been around for a long time, maybe that's an indication that they know how to pivot too, that they don't always do the same old. So yeah, but it is a real rub, because there's a part of it too, I think, is personality. How much are you willing to sacrifice or suck it up to kind of get along, keep the job versus where does it meet that pain point of they really just don't value me or it's too confining. I can't really express the range of my creativity or my interest in this place. So maybe it is, I'm better suited to be on my own or in a really organic organization, or no, I'm somewhere in the middle. I can tolerate a certain amount of rigidity or structure. It's kind of like, what's your balance?
Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing is that some people, like myself, may have a kind of full-time gig that I do working from home, saves me the 3 hours a day. And then, I have other side hustles and gigs and things like this that I do just because I'm passionate about it. So that's another way it can show up. Like I can be part employee in an organization and to some extent be a cog in that wheel, but I can also be kind of entrepreneurial and pursue my passions outside of work too. So there's lots of different combinations and variety for how polymathy can show up in organizations or as an entrepreneur or as a mix of both.
Excellent. Next up is Laura, Christine, and Barry. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought. I was wondering about, I worked in an organization that was a spin-off from work done at an institution of higher learning. And they had developed an AI program for teaching kids mathematics in high school. And they wanted to see how it would work in college remedial. So they came to our institution, which was down the block. And I looked at the program and decided I would like to do it in the remedial math program at that college. And I got the assistant to the chair interested, and he said, okay, do it. It was a mess, but I did it and I liked the program. And I did it, I wanted to do it as a research project for remedial math at my college. Anyway, that turned out okay. And I was hired to, when it became a company, they hired me because they wanted to do a college version. And so I went to the company and it was tiny. We were like 10 people in the beginning. And we were working everything because they were wanting to sell to high schools. So the teachers who developed the project became salespeople, as well as, I'm the guy who did this, I know all about it. And hey, I'm your teacher and I worked with it. So, they were like every person in the field. And then we had maybe one or two real salespeople and somebody else. So we were nuts and bolts and everybody did everything. And as it grew, it kind of grew out from that. And it got a little dicey because the guy who, you have these people who still wanted to be high school people in that environment, but you couldn't be anymore because you were selling stuff in not high schools so much. You were selling in high school, but you were selling now. You were a salesperson. You were no longer the high school teacher. You were now a salesperson fundamentally. So you had to wear different hats, and some people wore the hat better than others in that environment. And then there were real salespeople who came on to work. And we grew and grew and grew. And then they brought in this guy who was a polymath and who wanted to just take all of his experience at Microsoft and bring it in and, do this, do that, do this, do that, do that, build it up, blow it up. And people, just were scared. They were scared of this guy because he just wanted to do so much, so different, so fast. And this company, the guys who are doing the AI work slowly. I mean, AI takes a lot of intensive work. It's not something you can do quickly. For example, I wanted to do a college product. I did not want to do the product was not, it had to be used only
Laura,
in school.
Can you wrap up the story and ask a question or a comment?
Okay, it's just when you get a situation like that where you have people, everybody had their role in this very diverse industry that they had created. And so, this guy comes in and wants to be wild and crazy. I was wild and crazy because I got them to put the software where you could have a disk and take it home, and they never thought they would do that. And that was already tremendous craziness. And then this guy comes in and people were literally frightened, out of it. And he did not, I don't think he understood the nature of this industry. And at the same time, I don't think the industry allowed itself to change to fit the environment of becoming a company, you know, that was not high school any
Got it.
longer.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So,
So how do you deal with that situation?
very good.
So I'll just observe that, you know, it's not easy being a polymath, especially in the age of specialization. And there's kind of an underappreciation for polymathic talent right now. So there's that. And also it's still important to have people skills. Like, you may be the smartest person in the room and have all these great ideas, but if you're stepping into a team project, or, you know, trying to launch something with a team of people, you still have to be respectful for other people's perspectives and what they bring to the table. So polymaths tend to be like really smart, really creative, go-getters, but, you know, the people skills still matter in that too.
Leslie, would you like to comment, or shall we go to the next person?
No, I just concur with Angela. It sounds like a misunderstanding, or maybe a misalignment of roles too, and maybe an assumption that coming in, I have the skill set, they need me, I have this thing, it's my reputation, I'm going to come in and blow it up. It's, you know, rule number one, shut up and listen, right? It's like, learn where you're walking into, learn about the people and the place, and then figure out, where do I fit? What do they really need from me? Don't just, you know, go in and wield your hammer because you have a hammer.
Thank you. Folks, keep your comments and questions short so we can get through all of them. Next up is Christine, Barry, Daniel, Kevin, and Marco. Christine, go ahead. Christine, you need to unmute yourself.
All right, sorry about that. This is really lucky that I came across this because I didn't know what polymath was, but I do know that this is something that I'm good at. I mean, okay, so let me get a little more focused here. I just wrapped up a practice. I was a trial attorney for 25 years, and I was defense, and I represented alleged sexually violent predators. So it required a lot of expert testimony, and I became very good at reading articles and cross-examining. And I could jump around to different areas of science because I realized it's not hard to learn concepts. You don't have to know the algebraic formulas or anything. Most people that are trial attorneys don't understand that. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think if I could get the interview to be a polymath somewhere, I would probably get the job. But how do you go about doing that? I mean, I have the liberty for several months to just figure out what I'm going to do next. So I just closed my practice. Can you give like any ideas about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So and this is just my opinion, my advice. I'm not sure it's the right answer, but for people who identify as having polymathic talent or being a polymath, I think we've got to talk about this more and let that be part of your brand. Own it, leverage it. You know, when you're in an interview, make that explicit, that like, hey, I have multiple talents across different fields. I've got all this background. I've got, you know, these aptitudes. And should I get hired for this job, like, I'm going to do that job to the best of my ability using lots of different tools in my toolkit. I'm not going to be like a cog in a wheel. And, you know, you may hire me to do the job and I will do it. I will do it well. I will be excellent, but I'm going to go above and beyond because I like to learn. I like challenges. I like new projects. So, you know, that's one of the benefits you'll get if you hire me, is that I will do the job and I will do more. So that's what I would recommend, is that let's talk about this more. Hopefully organizations will pick up on this. That's the problem right now, is that most organizations aren't thinking this way. So you may bring it to the table and make it an issue and explicitly own it and let that be part of your brand, but they may not appreciate it. So your goal really is to help them appreciate it, to be on. I mean, really too, I mean, it's so sad that we can't be honest about our full skill sets. It's just so sad that we're trained to edit and censor and modify our resumes and the storytelling we do as well, so that we can just fit in their little box. So it is a real challenge, and you know, give it a try. See how owning it and making it part of your brand works. And if it doesn't work, I guess you can go back to pretending. But I think we should be able to bring our whole selves to work, especially when it has to do with skills and talents that help us bring more to the job.
Leslie, any comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, just one. So to your point, and I've heard a couple people on this session today say, I really didn't know what polymathy was until I was curious and I joined. A lot of folks out there don't know what it means. So to lead with that, and I don't disagree with Angela, bring your full self, use code words. I am a quick study. I am curious. I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm a self-starter, right? But if you cast yourself as I'm a quick study, that actually means a lot, right? I can learn about anything really fast, and I have an innate curiosity to do so and motivated. So, code words that kind of tap at those characteristics.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I saw Wen basically said the same thing in the chat there. I think there are ways of saying it without using the word polymath, because frankly, most people don't know that word. So it doesn't make sense to use it necessarily if you're trying to get them to give you a job.
Yeah, but if you describe what it looks like, they get it,
Yeah.
right? Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
need some of that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It can also help inform what kind of jobs you search for as well. Like maybe, Christine, you wouldn't search for a job that seems really routine and stable because you like to learn and be stimulated and have variety and you're really good at reading. And by the way, reading is something that most polymaths, not all, but most polymaths tend to do a lot of reading because they like to learn, and that's a big way of learning. So yeah, anyway, I feel like I'm blabbering. Hopefully that helped a little, and good luck in your job search.
Next up is Barry, Daniel, Kevin, and Marco. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, one suggestion I have about the term polymath, there's a book called Mindset by Dweck, I think. Mm-hmm. And she says there's two types of people, those who have fixed mindsets and those people that have growth mindsets. And I think that is really what we're talking about. Polymaths have growth mindsets. And I like to use the metaphor that polymaths are like a river and monomaths are like a pond that gets stagnated and no longer can live in it. So that's what I want to expand our thinking about, the benefits of polymath. Certainly, we're all talking about the productivity of doing your work, but there's such a thing as mental and physical health, regardless whether you're in the workforce or you're retired like me, that's important. And I'd like to know if there's anybody that has done any research about the health benefits, both mental and physical, of polymathy. Because I found that many of the things, like I talked about in my last Wednesday about being a super ager, really involve being a polymath. It's expanding, it's constantly learning, expanding your thinking increases your lifespan as well as your health span, as well as your productivity. So I think that's the elephant in the room. Health is what we're really talking about today, whether it's mental or physical health. And I think that's something we ought to need to talk about in polymath. Has anybody done any research? Have you, Angelia?
Hi, Barry. Good to see you. And it's such a good point that health matters, mental health, physical health, especially how are we going to have robust, rewarding careers if we're not well? And so thinking about how do we elicit our own wellness is an important question. Regarding specific studies on polymaths and health. So polymathy in general has been very, very understudied. I mean, academia prizes hyperspecialization, especially at the doctoral levels where they do research, and they're very siloed and departmentalized. And so doing research on not being highly specialized in an environment that's hyper specialized is difficult. It was sort of rebellious for me to write a doctoral dissertation on not being highly specialized, even though I was becoming highly specialized and not being specialized. You know what I mean? So I see someone cracking up, several people laughing. Yes, I was a real rebel studying polymathy in academia. So the other problem is, in addition to really academia anyway not being well positioned because of the way they're siloed and the tenure track process rewards hyper specialization, but there really have been very few studies. My dissertation was the first and only doctoral level dissertation on polymathy ever, as far as I know. And there haven't been a whole lot of studies done. However, there have been studies done on brain health and physical health and variety and learning and brain plasticity, and how, you know, continuing to learn, even doing like a crossword puzzle a day, like stimulating yourself, can help ward off dementia and Alzheimer's. But I did find studies that showed that lifelong learning, continual lifelong learning, is good for our brain health. Absolutely. In terms of, is it good for our physical health, I didn't necessarily find anything on that. So I don't know about that one. But thank you for sharing your pond versus river analogy, Barry. It's always good to see you here. Leslie, did you have anything else to add?
Just one quick comment too. So whether or not there's any research out there on whether it has a direct impact on health and wellness, it sure makes life a lot more interesting. I couldn't imagine not being curious and learning forever. I mean, I've learned enough. I'm good. We're done now. I'll just hang out here for another 30 or 40 years, right? I mean, at least it adds to the richness of life and keeps things, it's worth getting up for, right? So learn something new every day.
Yeah, no being a frog in a pond for you. Next up is going to be Daniel. Daniel, go ahead.
Hi guys. So I'm thinking about the nature of work, and I'd like you guys to maybe comment on the timeline extending past our current reality. What I'm seeing is that Angela and Leslie are both talking about an adjusting new paradigm towards this dynamic in society of polymath versus I guess straightforward conscientious workers, for example. Okay, and where I'd like to have you guys comment on is it tied into a more like a larger societal push towards a non gross domestic product orientation towards economies. And it may take a little bit of extrapolation if both Angela and Leslie work within government organizations, but the thrust of economies, if they're based off of production, I think this inherently sets a framework that's different than maybe an environmental compatibility. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like if we look at a post economy where you have something like a Yuval Harari who's bringing in a comment of a useless class, and he's saying it's a direct result of artificial intelligence.
Okay, let's go ahead and have them respond. Shall we?
Leslie, do you have anything?
So I'm not sure if there was a question in there because you're getting really meta on us, right? Was there a direct question on how long is it going to take? Because I do get it that we're a consumer-based economy right now, right? And that in and of itself is kind of limiting in terms of the way organizations are set up, the kinds of people that are sought, how things are rewarded. Is the question about how long will it take for us to basically turn over this entire orientation of how our economies are based?
Daniel,
well, I guess just
go ahead and state the question.
Yes, I know. Thank you, man. Okay. Okay, it's just that have you given much thought into that kind of post-consumer economy in terms of the nature of work?
Very good.
And it's just have you thought about it much, really?
Yeah. Because it kind of goes back to the very first question that Angela asked about, this whole going back to normal. It's like, we're not going back. It's just a matter of what's it going to look like? When's it going to really happen? I think we're at the very, very beginning, and nobody really knows what it's going to look like. There's a lot of people talking about it, and I think a lot of the folks talking about the shorter timeline are really thinking about just that. It's baby steps and not anything as drastic. But I do think longer term, there's going to be a much bigger metamorphosis. We don't even have our heads around yet.
Yeah, and the only thing I haven't really thought a lot about the post-consumer economy, Daniel, but I think this year, just 2020 and the global pandemic has forced a lot of us to say, like, what really matters what are our priorities? How do we want to spend our time? So many people have died, loved ones have passed away. I think there's a general questioning. I know I've certainly done it, of like, what matters, and maybe it's less consumption. And there's been less consumption this year because people are staying at home a lot. So there could be just a shift that's taking place in terms of the amount of consumption in our economy, just because of the pandemic, potentially. I don't know.
Okay, last two questions, and then we'll go to breakout rooms. Kevin, followed by Marco. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I got a comment. I would believe future of a job belongs to the polymath for human beings. For basic task-based work, so automation machine is better than a human being. That's slowly we going in with those complex work could be replaced by the automation machine. Obviously, what do you ladies thought about that? And another comment is about the job. Currently, like, we need a job to survive. This statement possible. We need to redefine the job definition. First, the job could be not exist. The second, if you have a job, that means you have the living better. Should be the UBI, like universal basic income, it could be come to place. The second one is sometimes we use polymath skills to identify a problem, especially to go fix the issue. Sometimes another way around, especially to find a problem, you need people have the polymath skills to figure out the problem and fix it. Thank you.
Kevin. I love what you said, by the way, about the future of jobs belongs to polymaths. More. And I think this is something we've got to think about. We've got to prepare ourselves for the future. And doing the work I do, I see so many polymathic types who feel like they resonate so much with this. They feel like this is their natural tendency to be curious, to want to learn, to value variety, and to pursue the fullness of their identity and their humanity. And so this is a natural human tendency in my position that's been sort of pushed out of us, for the sake of efficiency and being those cogs in the wheels. But we've got to prepare the pipeline for our complex future. And I think we've got to prepare more people to think and work and act in polymathic ways. And the way we've got to get to that culture change where this is acknowledged and appreciated, so that we can prepare that pipeline in the schools and just talking about it more, because tech is not going to stop coming. It is a train. It is coming, and it's already been coming, and things are going to get automated. And we've really got to think strategically about what unique human value are we going to add? What do we want to add? What do we want to co-create, as Leslie said early in the beginning? So it's a real opportunity to rethink the future of work and how we want our talent to be used in that future state.
All right, we'll take last question from Marco, and then we'll go to breakout rooms, followed by takeaways. Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, it was mentioned earlier that I guess like in Germany, there's the 32-hour work week. Like, it seems like that's optimal for maybe someone who's like at a job they don't necessarily like, or for the most part. But I was wondering, like, is there like an optimal number per week for like an entrepreneur that kind of like enjoys what they do? Or
so I don't have the answer. I can just share an anecdote that like one of the people I interviewed, Wendy, she was a very highly accomplished polymath, had like multiple side gigs and a full-time job and a startup, and was at a senior level, and had a podcast and wrote a book and ran marathons and like did all these really cool things. And I remember she was entrepreneurial by nature and had entrepreneurial side gigs in addition to her role at the startup. And she said that there's really never a day that goes by for her where she's not working on something on one of her various gigs. And that even when she has downtime, she would want to be doing those things. And so she said that it would be very stressful for her to just sit on a beach and do nothing. That would be stressful for her. So she always wanted to be stimulated, to be learning. Like her brain was just so hungry. There was another person I interviewed who said since she was 3, like she's just been constantly working on self-improvement. And she stayed busy like a lot of the time. And some polymaths even sleep less to try to fit in everything that they're interested in. they can function. I need sleep. Not all polymaths can do that. But yeah, absolutely. Like, I think entrepreneurial people and polymathic people, if they can find the right combination of passions, if they can find the right job and the right hobbies to fill their time, maybe it doesn't feel like work. And so maybe they're doing it 60 or 70 hours a week. It just depends on the person and their energy level too, I think. But you're right. I mean, if you're doing a job you hate, then doing less of it would probably be nice. I think the European example with like a 32-hour work week, I don't know if it's European or a certain country, but as we talked about earlier, how do you measure contribution in an organization? And to some extent, 40 hours a week is somewhat arbitrary. And I think there's an opportunity to rethink contribution and how that's measured, how performance is measured. I just blabbered on it, but Leslie, do you have any final thoughts before we go to the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think the question was really, is there, if it's getting it, is there an optimal number? 32 is a minimum. Yeah, because I'm working for someone else and it's a minimum. But is there an optimal number if I'm entrepreneurial and I love what I'm doing? And it's kind of like, at that point, if you're really engaged and your work is your life, there is no, the lines blur. And if you're okay with that, then it's like, it's you're on all the time. There's no requirement that says you have to go off the clock. So I think the notion of what's optimal, that comes down to individual differences at that point.
Yeah, especially if you're working from home too, in the new world where we see that you don't have to go do the button seat necessarily, that if you work on a computer or using tech to keep in touch with people or to deliver your work products, if you can do that from wherever, then, and you don't have a commute, you're not wasting time on things like commute, then it just frees up more time and energy to continue doing work that you're passionate about potentially. So it's a real opportunity to rethink how we're spending our time.
Excellent. So now we're going to go into breakout rooms for 18 minutes, and then we're going to come back here to share our takeaways. Okay, excellent. So folks, now it's time for takeaways. What are you walking away with? That's the question. So I'm going to call on people in the order in which I see in Zoom. If you don't want to share your takeaways, you can just type skip. We're running out of time, so please keep it brief, 1 minute max. The question is, what did you learn today? What are you walking away with? What are your takeaways? Next up is going to be Christine, Donna, and Eric. Christine. Christine, are you there? Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I'm terrible with Zoom, I gotta say. We had a really good conversation about cost cutting being the primary driver in the future and what the ramifications were about that. So I'm very interested in the economy in general. And I thought that was, thank you, Leslie. Was that Leslie?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And the other dude that was talking, he was good too.
Okay, excellent. Thank you to Leslie and the other dude. Next is Donna, Eric, and Jean. Donna.
So I love all of this polymath discussion. It's awesome. In our breakout room, Jeff brought up a great point about polymath and specialist, and that almost the irony of talking about polymath that almost as it's anti-specialist. So for me, I think of polymath as being a specialist in multiple areas. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to make it less anti-specialist and really promoting more that it's the spectrum of specialism, that you specialize in multiple areas. And then I just have a question too, maybe that could be discussed in future meetups around people skills for polymaths in particular? Because I think there's an extra challenge for people skills for polymaths. So again, thanks for this great discussion.
Excellent point. Thank you, Donna. And we will definitely come back to people skills. Keeps coming up all the time. Next up is let's see, Rebecca. You are unmuted, so you can go ahead, Rebecca. Then Eric and Andre. Rebecca.
Okay, yeah. I just want to thank everyone for this. It's been awesome. I think there's so many things I could say, so I'll keep it brief. For me, I'm really in a phase of knowing thyself, and so this has taught me a lot about myself. I'm pretty much I'll always be figuring myself out, but I'm made big strides in that. But mostly, this has helped me to understand how to apply myself in this world. So the application of me and how to move forward and benefit, the larger society has been just awesome. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next up is Eric, Andre, and Jean. Eric, go ahead. Okay.
Hey, it was just interesting discussion overall. We talked a lot in our group about the challenges that happen with the changing workforce in terms of, in particular, onboarding employees is quite hard. And one thing that we mentioned very briefly, but didn't develop a ton, is that it's hard in ways that will particularly be difficult for people who are good at many things. Because the more your job is a boss who's somewhere else just handing you things to do, the less you can do that organic thing where you see other stuff and get involved in it. The less you can just wander into somebody's area and start contributing. So it's going to be interesting to see how those challenges resolve.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Andre, Jean, and Jeff. Andre, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to thank you for the conference, and I would actually like to join the Meetup group for Polymath and join the next conversations because it's very interesting for me. So I would ask you if you could please put in the comments the Meetup group name or the link. That would be awesome. And I will summarize. I really enjoy. I enjoy the presentation. Lots of new information. But the two words that I will take away are from the 3 words are the happy river that we need to create as polymaths. So happy river with dams, with some limitations. I think that's one good way to think of ourselves as polymaths. And I will take that away alongside with the other very useful information. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Glad to have you here, and I have put the link in the breakout downstairs.
Thank you.
Now let's see. Next up is Jean, Jeff, and Kevin. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Always nice to join this presentation. And I think the polymath, and actually it's very coincident with the book I'm reading, Drive. It's mentioned, the research shows the intrinsic drive actually is working when your basic needs meet. And that research was actually hidden by some company, so they don't really understand it. They only use monetary as drive. Actually, at a certain point, monetary drive will actually make the creativity, reduce creativity. So a lot of companies actually realize that now, and they actually give more space for autonomy for employee, and gave space like Spotify. They gave them time to be creative, so they don't have to spend their own time to be an entrepreneur. So they can use their own creativity, and they actually get more product, more good creative product done during that time. So I think the company is starting to catch up on psychology, and I think with the world that don't change, maybe specialization will work better. But with the world keep changing, like this COVID, company have to reinvent themselves, and polymaths have more important role to play. So I think the future is for polymath. So we should keep working.
Excellent. That's a great slogan. Future is for polymaths. Next up is Jeff, Kevin, and Barry. Jeff?
So I just want to take a slightly divergent view here. I think it would be an error to place polymaths in some way as superior to experts. I think that the world needs experts as well as polymaths. When I need someone to do brain surgery on me, I really need them to be the best darn brain surgeon in the world. And I don't necessarily need them to also be a heart surgeon or a podiatrist and a dentist. And so I want to argue for the value of specialists. And instead of thinking of this as an either or proposition, I would alter the proposition and say that there are people who have different aptitudes, and by that strengths and talents and abilities. And we need each of us to find those places where we can be put to the greatest use, given who we uniquely are. And I would submit that there is an under appreciation probably of polymath set of aptitudes that is in a time of great change now shifting, and necessarily so. But I would not undervalue specialists to do things that we really need them to do.
Wonderful. Great observation. Next up is going to be Kevin, Barry, and Kimberly. Kevin.
Thank you. For me, polymath is about attitude, how do you thinking, and curiosity, and so on. And imagine, let's see, how do we communication in the history? We by mail, fax, pager system, phone, email, smartphone, now face-to-face. We can like Zoom now, right? Then let's see one example is if I was one worker in Detroit Big 3, that day I lost my job. If I polymath, I'm curious to learn something else. I can easily adapt to find another job. If let's see, I see that's my job, I keep looking for the manufacturer job before make a car. You never get it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Barry, Kimberly, and Lester.
Following up on my metaphor of polymaths are like a river, and what do rivers want to do? They want to flow, and they don't want to be dammed up. They don't want to be diverted. They want to flow where they want to go. And so the environment is very critical, I think, to a polymath, that they have an environment where they can flow. And so I think as we look forward to the future, the three main things we're going to be dealing with is technology, climate change, and disease or future pandemics. And the technology of using holodecks like on Star Trek is going to become very, very popular. And we're going to be able to not have to move. We're going to be able to stay in our homes, and we'll be able to change our environment virtually, and we'll be able to interact with people three-dimensionally as holographs. And so that is the future. And if you can get involved in that technology, I guarantee you're going to be in high demand.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry. Next up is Kimberly, Lester, and Mike. Kimberly. Okay, next up is Lester, Mike, and Linda.
Hi, it just happens over my desk, I have a quote from Eric Hoffer that reads, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." So, about a year ago, I ran across a Wikipedia page called Novelty Seeking, which is separate from the big 5 personality features. And I've been trying to find out how you measure your novelty seeking. Is that a research question in polymathy? Is there a score? You take a test and you find out? Or is there a PhD waiting to be written for novelty seeking. Apparently on Wikipedia, novelty seeking is 4 components: exploratory excitability, impulsiveness, extravagance, and disorderliness. And 3 of the 4, I'm hitting on all cylinders. I don't know about extravagance. So I'm just interested in the research. Is there I didn't hear how they measure it. Do you just declare yourself a polymath? So that's
Okay.
my takeaway.
Excellent, excellent. And what we'll do is that at the end, Leslie or Angela will be able to remark on anything, any comments that they want to remark on. But great observation, and thanks for the quote, Lester. Next up is going to be Mike, Linda, and somebody else, and Joe. Mike.
Well, the nature of work is undergoing change. Several people have mentioned it, Jeff, Barry, others. And the polymath discussion we're having right now is a necessary ingredient in all that. Yuval Harari he has several books that define what's going on in that concept of the nature of the economy and work and algorithmic artificial intelligence eliminating large numbers of jobs, or making a change in the way people and machines and people and
Mike, we've lost your
industries react. It was discussed in the breakout room, and okay, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, thank you. Next up is going to be Linda, followed by Joe. Linda?
Angela and Leslie, thank you for an excellent presentation leading to some very, very interesting discussions. I look forward to more presentations in the near future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda. Always nice to have you here. Next up is Joe.
I also want to say thank you to Angela and Linda, or Leslie as well, and to obviously Shrikant. But the idea, main thing that I'm taking away from this is the idea of work and how it's structured, and what that means for polymathy. And because you have to enable polymaths to be polymaths, and I think the organizational structures actually play a huge role in that. Otherwise, you can end up wasting a lot of talent. And so, some of these changes that are going to result as part of COVID-19, some of the remote work creates its own silo in its own way. And so that if you're only working remotely, you're only focused on a task, you don't necessarily recreate the environment and creativity that would necessarily exist in an office or in a centralized location. And so I think that that's a really important part of enabling polymaths going forward. The other part about it is not only to not look at it from just a cost benefit perspective, because I think that you will also tend to pigeonhole polymaths if you only look at your organizational structure from a cost benefit perspective, and then that would automatically negate any kind of individual or talent that you may have. So this is a much more than just a individual polymathic problem. It's a specialist issue. It's a organizational and structural issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Last is Wen, and then we'll go to Leslie and Angela for final comments. Wen, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, Leslie, and Shrikant for this meeting. So some of the things that I've heard as recurring themes are just the culture of the organization is very important. I know Barry mentioned several times the analogy of the river and the environment, and I just wanted to add on that and related to something Leslie said, which is it's not just about finding like the right job description. It's really finding an organization that values polymathic thinking and the a culture that values it. And the other thing I wanted to add, which I briefly touched upon in the breakout session, is I think a lot of struggles polymaths have is how to deal with other people's expectations of what society or our parents say you should be doing this or you should be doing that. And so for me personally, a big part of my own growth has been just learning to not care so much what other people think. And the last point I wanted to make, in our breakout room, there was a discussion about time management, how to balance being structured and rigid about getting tasks done versus allowing time for exploration, wandering, just free flow time. So those are the three themes that came to mind. Thank you.
Thank you, and great to see you here. Next up is going to be Leslie and Angela. So Leslie and Angela, any closing thoughts?
Thank you all so much for engaging. This was really, it was a fun way to spend an afternoon.
Wonderful,
I
thank you.
appreciate all of your comments, your questions, and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. It was, you're fantastic. Really appreciate that. Angela.
Muted.
Oops. Thank you. I try not to do that. Leslie is fantastic and so smart, so strategic, so well spoken. I'm so glad I met you, Leslie, and thank you for being my special guest today. Lester had asked about novelty seeking and like, can you measure polymathy? Right now, polymathy is not something that's measurable. At some point in the future, hopefully we will have a robust assessment of some kind. I know Michael Araki's working on a typology of the personality trait of polymathy, but there's different ways of looking at it. And yeah, right now it's sort of self-report or somebody calling someone else a polymath, and they may or may not be. In terms of novelty seeking, I don't know that much about the research on novelty seeking, to be honest. All I know is that polymathic types are probably more prone to prefer novelty and variety, that's for sure. And I guess the final thought for me, this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you, everybody. I guess, the thing I'll sort of end with is, as we think about the future of work, in the world, we also should think about the future of work that we want on an individual level, and just sort of, there's something to be said for going with the flow in that river, like Barry talked about, but there's also something to be said for sort of choosing the direction you go in, using your oars to sort of steer where you go in that journey down the river in your boat. And I just want to encourage you all to reflect on, like, what do you want your lives to look like? And do you want to have a combination of things that you're expert in, or do you want to have, one thing you're expert in with hobbies on the side? Do you want to be a narrow specialist? Like, you get to choose your journey. You could choose it unconsciously and not really think about it and see what happens, but you could also sort of reflect on it and direct it. So yeah, I guess the future of work, I just want to encourage you all to think about the future of work for you. And even if you're retired, think about, what do you want your future to look like, and how can you help write that story in a way that feels authentic and purposeful and rewarding for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, everybody. Just the comments, questions, discussions, and takeaways from everybody just adds to the richness of this experience. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much, and see you folks soon.